Hi and welcome to another Tom Did It video. In this series I'll be sharing my general understanding of carburetors, how I clean a carburetor, and then some tuning tips in part 2 which will probably be filmed out on the road. As usual, I'll be demonstrating this on my RS125 and using the stock carburetor for this model of bike, a Dellorto PHBH28, 28 being 28mm on the engine side of the carb. In a few words, I'd like to explain how it works. The engine sucks clean air through the air filter into the larger opening at the back of the carburetor. The piston movement creates a vacuum, and fast-flowing air pulls a precise atomized mist of fuel up through the jets where it enters the engine on the engine manifold side. Inside here, there's a series of tiny brass jets with very precise holes that regulate the fuel to create an ideal air-fuel mixture of around 12 to 13 to 1. That is 12 parts air to every 1 part fuel. So let's take it apart. Inside here, it moves up and down. We have the slide and the needle. Then we can remove the float bowl. That nut is also connected to the main jet, and that's this top piece here. We remove the plastic float bowl. There's your floats. This is the choke. This is the pilot jet. How small that is. Pilot jet come out of here. There's also, you can carefully feel that's seated there. There's a brass tube in there, and this is the emulsion tube that on the pilot circuit turns the fuel into a tiny mist or droplets. You can see how precise and small these holes are. Now in here there's another brass piece associated with the main jet. It's part of the main jet circuit and the needle circuit. I think using a 9mm. There it is. Need to keep all these little bits together. This is the main fuel line. It's a 10mm spanner on that one. You can see the petrol hose connects to here, and then it runs through that gap in through this filter, which then finally tracks its way down into the float bowl. And there you go. This one is the air fuel mixture screw. That's part of the pilot circuit. This is used for tuning and helps control the fuel mixture that goes to the engine. If I was to do this screw up, you would be restricting the petrol, and if I was to loosen it, I would be letting more fuel in. How you know this screw is either a fuel screw or an air screw. Generally, it depends on what side of the carb it's on. If it's on the engine side, it's usually a fuel screw, like a petrol screw. If it's on the other side of the carb, splitting the carb in half here, if it's on this side of the carb, the airbox side, it's generally an air screw. So the same principles. By loosening that, you're letting more air in if it was on this side. But because it's on this side of the carb, it operates the petrol only on things like idle and the pilot circuit. My bike was running quite well before doing this video. You should always record how many turns this one has on it before removing it. So pull this out. There's a spring, a steel washer, and a little rubber seal. This screw here controls the idle and the slide position. And just like that, it's on a thread. It has a washer and a rubber seal on there. And as you screw that in, it adjusts the slide position, which we'll move on to soon. So now the carb has been disassembled, you're ready to clean it. So now I'm using a throttle body and carb cleaner. We'll start the cleaning all over. I'll just spray that. It'll be quite a messy job inside. If your carb's really bad, you may need to soak it overnight. But I like to get all in here, all around there, and in here. These tubes are breather tubes, go into the float bowl, and the tube on this side goes up there and goes into that hole, and then the tube on the opposite side here goes into that hole, just there. So as I spray that, to prove that they're not blocked, it could spray up and hopefully not hit the camera or me in the face. There you go. There you go. They're clean. Again, my carb is clean. I've cleaned it when I got the bike, and it doesn't seem to be contaminated with anything like dirt or bad fuel. So depending on the condition of your carb, you may need to clean it more than me. This is a demonstration video, so I don't need to go too far with it. There's plenty of good carb cleaning videos on the internet which show you different techniques, from using carb cleaners like I'm using to boiling your carb in lemon juice. But again, do your research on that. But for this, I know that this carb is clean just by spraying it through all the carb orifices and clean liquid coming out. Extremely careful with these, they're plastic. Now I'd like to remove the nut from the main jet. And there you go, there's your main jet. And what I'm using is a 125 for my main jet, and this comes into operation at 3/4 to full throttle. Now back in the cleaning dish. you can see through it. Perfectly clean. Down through there, make sure that that's not blocked. Here's the fuel filter. It's like your last level of protection before the fuel enters the carbs. Make sure yours is clean, and that's an example of a clean one. Now onto this. You need to be able to see through them as you can. And the same in and around there. So my choke is a 70 on the standard carb. You can take this apart, I've put it back together, but again with the carb cleaner just spray it, make sure it's clean. This is for the needle. There's no contamination on there. And you can look through it. Very important. The BN266. With this, when you're cleaning, you just need to make sure that you do a quick assessment, making sure it's clean, and also that the spring in the top here, making sure that still operates. And also, it's quite common that these wear around the rubber tip here, and I'll show you in a minute, but if it's worn, you need to replace this. This is part of the float circuit. Spray that, make sure it's clean, like this, making sure you can see daylight through all the holes. Making sure that's clean. If it's not, spray it, toothbrush, soak it, do what you need to do, just so it looks like that. The pilot jet looks very clean. No need to show you how to clean that. You should be able to see daylight through it, through the middle. There's a tiny hole. Vitally important that's kept clean. It's quite a common cause of failure. The pilot circuit, the bike won't start, has a bad idle because the holes are so tiny on here. They've got to be kept clean. The smallest amount of dirt can clog that. It's so important to keep it clean. The emulsion tube, so this sits just above the pilot jet that I just showed you. Again, the holes on this are so small. Going to be able to see down through those. I don't know if this camera will get it. Never use a drill bit to clean any parts of the jets, or if it's clogged after soaking or cleaning, and you know, a soft bristled toothbrush won't clean out these holes, and you still can't see daylight through them. One way I like to check is to use a paintbrush and pick a single hair off of the paintbrush. And then what you should be able to do is put the hair, if I can do this on camera, it's a bad view. You see how the hair of the toothbrush, of the paintbrush, sorry, the paintbrush has gone straight through? That shows you that it's not blocked. Do that to all the holes you can see. So now we'll start to assemble the carb. Now it's clean, and I'll just tell you a bit about the function along the way. The fuel filter on the carb, and then this. So that's perfect, not too tight, but tight enough it's not going to vibrate loose. Choke jet. And that goes right in there, in that hole. So that's tight. So now I'm going to install the pilot circuit, which is the emulsion tube, and this one is a B62. And again, this is responsible for atomizing the fuel on the pilot circuit, turning the fuel from a liquid into a fine mist. And the pilot circuit is responsible for starting the bike anywhere around the off to quarter throttle position. Can be tuned as well with the fuel screw, which I'll show you in a minute. Now this is the pilot jet. I'm using a 65. It's the hole here. It tells you the jet size. This is a 65 hole. So just to explain, the fuel goes through the hole, is atomized by the tube that's in here, goes up through and into the engine. Now we can start on the float circuit. That requires a small washer, and that goes in there. I just push that down so that it's sat nicely in the hole. And then we can install this one. This is designed to have a bowl shaped in the bottom so that this rubber point of the float sits in there, and when there's enough fuel it creates a stop, and no fuel can bypass that small jet there. See how it's seated in there? Again, making sure the spring here is operational, and I'll show you a bit more about that as I go. So let's put that back in. Now let's carefully tighten that, again with our 9mm. Now here's your float, making sure there's no damage to it. I'll show you how to set the float in a minute. We'll get to that. You hook that into the float, and then very carefully so it's in. It's sat in there now. Now I need to get this pin, basically just goes through there. Nice and careful. No force at all. And there it goes, it's sliding in there. And that presses into there. I just get the end of a flat screwdriver and I place it on there, and then I give it a light press. That's enough. That's not going to come out now. I've squeezed that in. As you may know, they're joined through this pin right here, so as one moves, the other one moves with it, because you can have carbs with separate float heights. Well, these are joined in the middle, so when you set one side, you set both, obviously, as they both move. Now, you can remember just inside here, you do have the float pin with the rubber tip. So now, you don't set them in this position because the weight of the float is too strong for the spring inside the float pin. So to take the weight off of that, they're in the fully down position now and compressing the spring. You tip them up on the air side, the airbox side of the carb, and what that does is relaxes the floats So when you touch them, they spring. And now the manual says from this surface here of the carb to the very back of the float here should be 24.5 mil to 23.5 mil. So I'm going to use these and zero that out. As I undo this, I'm pulling these. I'm going to be using this pin as I go to get this around the 24.5 mil. And that's right there. And that is touching the top of the float. And my measurement is 23.98. So I'm well within the millimeter tolerance with my measurement between there and the top of the float. Of course, if your measurement's off, then you need to remove the float and carefully bend this piece of steel here so that the floats sit back or sit forward, but because mine is within spec, I'm going to leave it. Let's put the idle screw back in. As you do this up, if I can show you, it's starting to come through right there. Now, as I do this up, you can see it's coming through. Now, the end of it is, if I take it out just for demonstration, the end of it is pointed to a smooth end. Now, that, as you do it up, moves the slide position. So as you do this up, the thread engages and that raises the slide. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, we'll do this all the way up for now, very carefully. It's not tight at all. This is just literally 2 fingers. I can feel that stopped. And what you can see here as well on the side of the carb, in line, I've made my own groove. This is an indicator for me, which I'll get to in a minute. That tells me that that's in the full in position. Now we can move on to the main jet and the needle function. So, looking at this tube, it's quite long and it sits inside the carb in this hole and joins to this copper piece inside this piece. Now, depending on the throttle position, the needle moves up and down inside the carb and actually inserts inside this tube. Now, in the throttle off position, this plugs the hole and it restricts the fuel, and the fuel can't move up through this tube and then into the engine because the needle has physically plugged the hole. Now, as you twist the throttle, the needle slides out of the tube, and because of the shape of the needle, as it gets to the pointy end, there's more room for the fuel to flow up and into the engine. So that's the basic description. Let me put this in. Let's put in there. I'll screw it up into the permanent position. There you go. And now that is inside the carb in that tube. So if I now demonstrate with the needle, push that into the slide. This slide can only go in one way using this groove on that. So it needs to go in this way. Easy. Now, you can imagine, based on the throttle position, the needle is going in and out of that tube. With a closed throttle, the pilot is working, the pilot circuit, because the needle is physically plugged that tube. And there's not enough airflow to drag fuel up and then into the engine. So then, because of the shape of the needle, as you raise the throttle, it's unplugging the tube that I just inserted, and it allows more air because the slide has lifted. There is now a greater vacuum of air running through. It's running through, and the hole in here has become bigger in the tube, and that allows more fuel and more air. The slide meters the air, and the needle inside, depending on the position, meters the fuel. Now moving on to the main jet itself, fuel is sucked through the bottom here, through these bottom holes, because this sits in here. You can see the holes would be in and around these. Fuel is sucked through here and up through the main jet. Now, there's a very specific hole in the main jet that's been drilled to an exact size. Again, I'm using a 125 main jet. That's the tiny brass piece on the top. This bit here is a 125. Now, similar to taking it off, I just put it in the spanner there, and then I pinch it up. Now, before any fuel from, say, half throttle to full throttle is dependent on this one, mostly dependent on the main jet, no fuel can flow through here and up through there without traveling through this precisely drilled hole. So that's how the main jet works, and the different sizes. Let me put that on the right way to start with. That goes on there. Now, we'll put the main jet in and screw it up. Now we know how the main jet operates. I'll just describe a bit further, in a bit more detail, the needle. As I've showed you, the throttle position alters the slide and the needle. Now, the needle can plug the main jet by plugging the tube, and depending on the needle position, there's a C-clip here, and if you adjust this C-clip, one of the 4 positions, the higher you put the clip up the top of the needle, that drops the needle into the carb, restricting the petrol flow. So it actually leans the mixture. If you restrict the petrol, you are leaning the mixture, because the airflow, depending on the slide, is constant. It's a constant flow. It's obviously restricted there at one speed, and it speeds up, speeds up, speeds up, speeds up. So if we move this to the very top position, it's dead easy. You just unclip it, Try not to lose it. So now that's taken off. If I was to put this on the top position, I would be leaning the mixture. However, if I put the pin now on the very bottom position, which is down here, that clicks on there. Now it's in the bottom position. I put that back in the slide. I have now raised the needle so more fuel can get into the carb. So there's more sticking out the top here, which means the needle's raised, allowing more flow because of the shape of the needle. I'm going to restore this to where I had it before, which was, this is considered to be the fourth position, being on the bottom. I'm going to change it not to the third, but to the second position. I hope that makes sense, and I am going to demonstrate how the bike runs with different needle positions in the next video. So it's now time to put the carb here back onto the bike, which involves connecting the cable to the carb slide. I'll show you quickly how to do that. Firstly, put the spring on. That just slides over there like that. That one goes through there, and then the cable goes in the top part. You can see that the cable's in there and it can't come out, it's locked in. Now I just need to do a bit of fine playing here to get the pin in. So you remove the spring from that, tip the washer out, and then the pin, which I've also changed the clip, by the way, to be on the third position, which is a bit richer. I originally had it in the second, I now want it in the third, just to trial it out on the road. So then that pin goes in there. That washer slides down, and then that goes on there. Give it a quick test by pulling the throttle. Perfect. Not too much torque at all. Now what I like to do is put a small bit of grease around here